On this Friday night, preparing for the worst. Canada braces for a fresh onslaught of COVID-19 cases.
Something could happen to this virus. Who knows? Something could change.
As one province adjusts its back-to-school plan again. From out and about to locked in. The UK's new rules for some travelers. The science of a hyperactive hurricane season. The warnings for an intense few weeks ahead. And fan scan.
People are looking for tech to maybe take a place of harsh enforcement.
Major League Baseball's potential home run solution for spectator safety.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Canada's top doctors are giving us a COVID-19 reality check tonight. They say they're striving for a best-case scenario, or what they're calling a slow burn, where the number of cases remain low. But they are preparing for a worst-case scenario, warning of a potential peak this fall. It is possible that a surge in cases will coincide with cold and flu season, and that will potentially add a strain on hospitals and other health resources. Health officials don't know exactly what the future holds, but they do say we need to be prepared. Dr. Theresa Tam didn't mince words today, giving Canadians this warning.
The idea is to plan for something that's at least several times worse than your previous experience.
In the short term, the modeling from the federal government estimates that the number of COVID-19 cases could grow past 127,000 by August 23rd, and the number of deaths could climb past 9,100. All of this comes as anxiety increases about potential outbreaks when students go back to school in September. For weeks, Ontario Premier Doug Ford has been under mounting pressure to make changes to that province's back-to-school plan. As Michael Couteur explains in tonight's top story, parents and educators still have lots of questions about how children will be protected from COVID-19 when schools reopen.
Ann Watkins would normally be soaking up the last few weeks with her grandkids before school starts, but she'll be taking care of them in September because the family feels the Ontario government is rushing children back without enough planning.
Maybe after the schools have demonstrated a level of safety, then maybe more parents will be happy to send the children back.
That lack of confidence is likely why the return to school plan has been tweaked. Thursday, Ontario's education minister tried to address concerns about ventilation in schools, spending $50 million to improve HVAC in buildings.
So $50 million is, we're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, but it's a drop in the bucket of what is actually needed to ensure that these buildings are safe, healthy, and well maintained.
In fact, Krista Wiley of the Fix Our Schools advocacy group says there are $16 billion worth of repairs needed at schools right across the province.
I've already indicated a flexibility for the first week.
Ontario is willing to delay the opening of schools, like in British Columbia, if certain boards don't feel ready in the name of public health.
I'll work with boards if they think they need a tad more time. I know that there's an overall broader imperative to get kids back into class. So we know that for their wellness and their development and their mental health, but we're going to be flexible, we're going to be reasonable.
For months, politicians have pointed out the economy can't fully restart until parents can go to work, but first, kids have to be able to go to school. Ontario's plan was rolled out in late July, with details on remote learning announced this week.
Just don't understand why it still continues to be a bit of an afterthought for people.
Ottawa School Board trustee and father Mark Fisher says the province should have been planning for this months ago.
It would have taken probably a smart person 24 hours to say, what are we going to do in September when we need to bring schools back? That's not a revelation that comes at the end of July and August.
Instead, he and other Ontario parents have until Sunday at midnight to decide if their kids will be heading back to the classroom or staying home. Michael Couture, Global News, Ottawa.
One thing's for sure, no matter where you are, the situation is constantly evolving. Nova Scotia has now changed course and is now going to implement mandatory masks for grades 4 to grade 12 students when classes return on September 8th.
This change is in line with new federal recommendations around mask wearing and what we know about their effectiveness to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
Students won't have to wear masks when they're sitting at their desks, but they will have to wear them in hallways and other common areas if a 2-meter distance can't be maintained. The government says ventilation systems are being checked in schools across Nova Scotia to make sure all equipment is operating properly and that the windows can be opened. Nova Scotia reported one new case of COVID-19 today after going 11 days with no new infections. In Manitoba, 40 more people have tested positive. That is the highest daily total since the start of the pandemic. Both BC and Alberta recorded 84 new cases today. 87 more people tested positive in Quebec and 92 in Ontario. In Toronto, health authorities are warning patrons of a popular downtown strip club they may have been exposed to COVID-19. As many as 550 people who attended the Brass Rail Tavern may have been in contact with an employee who tested positive. People who had close contact with that individual are being asked to self-isolate and get tested. And north of Toronto now, to a resort in cottage country, a cluster of cases has been linked to out-of-town visitors. A group of families, 30 people in all, traveled together to Deerhurst Resort for the August-long weekend. 11 of the 30 have tested positive for COVID-19. Ontario's top doctor says they ignored physical distancing and social bubble rules. Many asylum seekers have been working on the front lines of this pandemic. Now they're being given an early chance to become permanent residents of Canada. Immigration Minister Marco Mendicino says a new program is being launched to acknowledge the vital role they've played in our country's fight against COVID-19.
This is an exceptional measure for exceptional times in recognition of exceptional service. We deeply appreciate the contributions newcomers have made to Canada in recent months.
Normally, asylum seekers have to wait for their claims to be accepted before they can become permanent residents. The new program waives that requirement. There are several criteria asylum seekers must meet to qualify. Exactly how many will benefit from this program is unclear. The ban on non-essential travel between Canada and the United States has been extended for another 30 days as several American states battle new outbreaks of COVID-19. The border will remain closed until at least September 21st. The month-long ban was first imposed in March and has been reviewed and extended several times as cases in the United States spike. To another border now, the UK removed 6 countries from its safe travel bubble today, including France, where cases are spiking. And in New Zealand, a country that seemed to have eradicated the virus, there's a new outbreak that genome testing shows originated overseas, possibly in Australia or Britain. As Crystal Goomansingh reports, travel restrictions are once again tightening as worldwide infections top 21 million.
When we heard the news late last night, we changed our plans and decided to come straight home to miss the quarantine.
Not wanting to be locked away for 14 days, Britons, many on vacation in nearby France, sacrificed the rest of their holidays. People hit the roads, train stations, and ferry terminals. Things got so busy, officials told people not to show up if they hadn't already booked a ferry or train.
The next bit that I found really confusing is why it started at Saturday at 4 a.m. I mean, that made no sense, because surely if it's bad, you start it now rather than in a couple of days' time at 4 a.m. So it just seems completely disorganised. It just seems utterly ridiculous.
There was a warning a week ago when infection rates in France surged higher than they've been since May. The UK government put travellers on notice.
We were expecting it last week. We were delighted to have been able to come to France for a week. We thought we wouldn't be able to, but we have, and we've had a lovely holiday.
The new quarantine rules apply to anyone returning from France, the Netherlands, Monaco, Malta, Turks and Caicos, and Aruba. In retaliation, France is threatening to impose a quarantine on visitors who arrive from the UK. Some complain, saying infections aren't that high. New Zealand, however, is a good example of how quickly things can change. That country went from being virus-free for more than 100 days to extending the lockdown in Auckland.
Our current expectation is that by this time, the perimeter of the cluster will be identified, will be isolated, and we can move to level 2 in Auckland with confidence.
But the current cluster has links to 4 schools and a care home, leading the Prime Minister to warn that the outbreak will grow before it slows. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
New Brunswick may soon be headed to the polls. The political parties had been negotiating a deal to delay an election until 2022 or after the pandemic's over. But today, the Liberals pulled out of the talks, accusing Progressive Conservative Premier Blaine Higgs of unacceptable negotiating tactics. Higgs says he'll take the weekend to consider his next steps. In Ontario, a man is dead and an investigation is underway after a car exploded in downtown Kitchener. It happened this morning outside the regional courthouse there. Police say a car parked in front of the building and it exploded. It appears an improvised explosive device, or IED, may have been used. A man was found dead inside the vehicle.
The investigation to this point has revealed that the individual who's deceased in the vehicle is possibly the male responsible for the explosion.
Police say they're searching 2 properties connected to the dead man. His name has not been released. U.S. President Donald Trump is using a page from his old election playbook with a baseless conspiracy theory about presumptive Democratic VP nominee Kamala Harris.
I just heard that. I heard it today that she doesn't meet the requirements. And by the way, the lawyer that wrote that piece is a very highly qualified, very talented lawyer. I have no idea if that's right. I would have assumed the Democrats would have checked that out before she gets chosen to run for vice president.
You'll remember Trump started his first campaign with a racist birtherism allegation against U.S. President Barack Obama. And the disinformation and the distraction has continued, this time to divert attention from his trailing numbers and apparent plan to make it more difficult for Americans to vote by mail. As Jennifer Johnson reports, critics call it an attempt at voter suppression.
As Americans await another round of COVID-19 financial relief, a bill in the House has hit a roadblock. U.S. President Donald Trump. In the bill, emergency funding for the U.S. Postal Service to handle millions of mail-in ballots for the November election. The president claims without proof that will lead to fraud.
Millions and millions of mail-in ballots, because they can be forged, they can be captured, they can be taken.
Yet President Trump and the First Lady have requested mail-in ballots to vote in next Tuesday's primary election in Florida. Democrats, too, are claiming fraud after the president appointed a major donor to the Trump Victory Fund, Louis DeJoy, as Postmaster General. They claim he immediately put in cost-cutting measures to delay mail delivery.
He seems to have been put in to destroy the post office and certainly make it much harder to conduct a fair election.
Longtime Postal Service workers say mail delivery has been disrupted after DeJoy took over in June.
So for us, we have to completely change the culture of the Postal Service. It was very disheartening.
A judge in Pennsylvania has asked the Trump campaign for proof of potential fraud. After officials there and in 46 other states were warned by the U.S. Postal Service, it can't guarantee all ballots cast by mail for the election will arrive in time to be counted. Experts say there's never been evidence of widespread fraud and question the president's motives.
You have a president who is clearly saying we may not be able to trust the results of the election this November, giving himself the possibility that he might challenge the result if he's defeated.
In 2016, nearly a quarter of Americans mailed in their ballots, yet the president did not question the outcome of that election. But as he trails presumptive U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden in recent polls, the president has ramped up his rhetoric on the integrity of this election. The Postal Union announced Friday it's endorsing Biden, warning the very survival of the U.S. Postal Service is at stake. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Fortnite legal fight. Coming up, why the maker of the popular game is suing 2 tech giants. Canada's Competition Bureau is investigating Amazon.ca to determine if the online retail giant is abusing its market dominance in this country. At issue is whether Amazon.ca has been engaging in conduct intended to eliminate or discipline competitors. The Competition Bureau will also look at whether Amazon's policies force other companies to sell products at lower prices on other websites, and any strategies Amazon uses to influence shopping habits to purchase products from them versus a competitor. Forget fighting in the game world. Fortnite is in a legal fight with Apple and Google after the companies dropped the popular game from their app stores.
From the darkest depths of deep space.
They say Fortnite's developer Epic Games violated their guidelines when it introduced a direct payment plan that bypasses their platforms. Apple and Google take a 30% cut from in-app sales. Fortnite is free, but users can make in-game purchases for things like weapons and character features. Epic Games is suing Apple and Google, challenging the rules. Bracing for the heart of hurricane season ahead, why it could be one of the worst on record.
You're watching Global National.
People living along the U.S. East Coast are keeping an eye on Tropical Storm Josephine, which is formed in the Atlantic Ocean. It is the earliest J-named storm in history, breaking the previous record set back in 2005. That year was the most active Atlantic hurricane season ever. Eric Sorensen takes a look at what we can expect to see this year.
Get ready for more of this. High winds and waves barreling for North America. The first major hurricane of the season did serious damage along the Atlantic coast earlier this month, but we are only now entering the peak hurricane season from mid-August through early October.
We're heading into the heart of hurricane season. We've had 10 named storms, with Josephine just recently named. And that's way ahead of schedule.
We're in an active cycle for tropical storms. Satellite images of huge cyclonic systems foreshadowing the conveyor belt of what's to come.
The outlook for this year does call for 19 to 25 named storms, 7 to 11 hurricanes.
An increasingly hot summer builds up the opportunity for hurricanes, but other large trends are also coming together. This year's African monsoon season is triggering a wave train of systems to kick off tropical storms. Over in the Pacific, the El Nino cycle is 2 to 7 years long, but is trending towards La Nina, which can reduce the wind shear to counter hurricanes. Then there is the Atlantic Oscillation. This is a multi-decade phenomenon over the surface temperature of the entire North Atlantic, and it is trending towards warmer waters. And finally, there is climate change. The atmosphere around the world is warming, and that could trigger serious hurricanes.
There's a potential for dangerous hurricane-force winds.
North Carolina's governor earlier this month with an all-too-familiar refrain.
That means we must be on high alert.
If it seems like every year recently has been ripe for Atlantic storms, that's because it has.
We have been in one of these active phases since 1995, so we're currently in an active phase right now.
As global temperatures continue to rise, more ocean water can evaporate. Plus, the warmer air above is capable of holding more moisture. In 2017, Hurricane Harvey was a Category 4 storm for winds, but was made catastrophic by the rain, more than 100 centimeters in Houston. Such mega storms are rare, but likely to be more frequent.
There are the longer-term climate change signals, which a couple of recent NOAA studies do point to an increasing frequency of the major hurricanes, which are categories 3s, 4s, and 5s.
Long term, an active phase for Atlantic hurricanes. Short term, the right conditions for a very active season. Experts say batten down the hatches for the next 2 months. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
We're getting a clear sense of why that oil spill off of Moritius is so damaging to the East African nation's coastline. An estimated 1,000 tons of oil is spilled from a Japanese ship, and it's spreading. Recent satellite images show a dark slick that has grown more than 8 times since the ship ran aground in late July. The oil is now polluting 2 nearby protected marine ecosystems, and experts say damage from the environmental disaster will be huge. Next, the software that could be the ticket to getting spectators back into stadiums. It has been months since Major League athletes have heard the roar of fans while playing to packed stadiums and arenas. Health officials say that's not likely to change anytime soon. But some Major League Baseball teams are in talks with a tech company that could help fill seats safely. As Mike Drolet explains, fans will only score if they play by the rules.
It's nice to see fans are having fun with the new pandemic rules for stadiums and arenas. This guy populated an entire section with 100 versions of himself. And epidemiologists say his clones will likely have the same seats again next year.
I think that if you look at things realistically, we're not going to have these big scale events, sports venues, concerts, anything like that in the pre-vaccine era.
Yet there is hope. Korean baseball is now allowing fans to attend games. However, capacity is maxed out at 10%. The fans are all wearing masks and sitting far apart. And Korea, unlike the U.S., has handled the pandemic well.
But if you pack a stadium, even if everybody's wearing a mask and they're all doing it properly, it still is a risk for transmission. And that's why I think that, you still want to have a sparse crowd far enough apart so that even if somebody's not wearing a mask properly, you have a buffer zone there.
Can North American sports fans respect those buffer zones? Or is it a recipe for confrontation? Well, a California company founded by Calgarian Jazz Banga is offering a solution. Software that uses existing security cameras to spot fans ignoring mask rules. It's then up to the facility operators to determine how to respond.
Right, so I think there's a lot of places where people are looking for tech to maybe take a place of harsh enforcement.
In terms of privacy, there's no facial recognition involved. It's all about the mask.
And so we just provide heat maps, and that's really the essence of the feedback we give. There's no identity involved at all.
Banga is talking with some major league teams, but he won't say which. At this point, it's all speculation, mixed with the faint hope of sports fans. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that's Global National for this Friday. I'm Farah Nasser. Tonight's Your Canada is Grand Lake, New Brunswick, east of Fredericton. If you'd like to share your Canada with us, please email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks so much for watching. Jeff Semple will be here tomorrow. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.